this current version of workflow. Like let's say I have some interaction I need to do with my line of business system, and I don't necessarily want that logic to be in my workflow. I could create a service that I can add to the workflow runtime in SharePoint that will just live there and just will exist for the purpose of serving requests to workflows calling this, like creating customers and getting updates on orders. And these workflow services can receive calls from workflows, external methods is what it's called, and they can also provide events to workflows, so they can wake workflows up. So let's say an order was completed, my line of business system can work with this service to notify my workflows. So a way that you could have done this in Workflow 2007 is a lot of times maybe you would have had an external system update a dummy task. So the workflow would create a task that wasn't even meant for a human. The task was just there for the purpose of some other system to come in and update that task so that it would back up. Now you can use these workflow services, so it's a little more, just a little better way to architect a solution. And then workflow event receivers, so you can create it. Now you just don't have event receivers on lists, so you can, on the started, postponed, and completed, you can basically just handle these events in your code. So I will go through and show you the experience of creating a new workflow in 2010 and just how easy it is to go from beginning to end. So I'm going to go into Visual Studio. I'm going to say down to 3.5, SharePoint 2010, sequential workflow, my awesome workflow.
Notice that's Visual Studio Premium 2010. Is that required also?
No.
It's not okay.
No. I don't believe so. I'm not sure what the minimum.
It's in professional.
Yeah. And professional is the lowest SKU, right? Yeah, I mean, I think the SharePoint tools are it's not there's no SharePoint support in Express, I don't believe. But yeah, the paid version of Visual Studio I think has the SharePoint tools. So I'm not going to go into the difference between Sandbox and Farm Solutions, but workflows are always solutions in 2010. It's letting me pick the site for debugging. So this is going to give me true F5 debugging. So I'm going to call my workflow my awesome workflow. And it's going to be a list workflow. And now it's asking me for what library do you want to associate with in this site that you chose, and what task and what history list. And this is just for debugging purposes. This is not going to be stored anywhere or when you actually package this up for deployment into production. This is just for testing inside Visual Studio. And I only want this to start when someone manually starts it. So finish, and it's going to create my project for me. So as if you've not worked development in Visual Studio in 2010, you get your nice features area. Features and solutions are first-class citizens now. Yay! Where's that? So I'm going to rename my workflow to my awesome workflow. And I'm just going to do something. I'm just going to create a task and manage that task. So I'm going to go down my toolbox. So as you can see, the concepts are similar to something even if I was doing SharePoint Designer. I have my tasks, I have my sequence, and I can go from there. So I'm going to configure it real quick, and since we don't have a ton of time, I'm not going to talk too much about what I'm doing. But rest assured, it's pretty neat, I guess. So basically, what I'm doing here is I'm going to task, and then I'm managing the lifecycle of the task. So you can see by default, unless I write some other more complex activity, I'm having to manage that lifecycle. And SharePoint Designer, as you saw, does that. So I guess I will say that you now have to look a lot more closely. If you don't have any, there are third-party companies out there that do workflow tooling on top of SharePoint Workflow. Like there's a company called Nintex, which I happen to think their product is really nice. And they have a visual designer that sits in it's Ajax, and it's all no code, but they have some very complex activities, integrating with line of business systems, BizTalk, provisioning, Active Directory users, things like that. So it's a great tool, and they gear it towards their designers really pop that they that they have, but they also have all these activities, so they say, you know, anybody can write this stuff, you don't have to know how to write code. And they have a lot of templates out of the box, so a lot of people want to go that route. But you really, my point to this is, you really have to think a lot harder about, should I be doing this in Visual Studio, or should I be doing it in Designer? I think more often than not, unless you're doing some very complex, you know, not so much just document-related scenario, SharePoint Designer may be a great fit, you know, out of 10, as opposed to getting in and dealing with what Visual Studio adds complexity-wise. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a task. While the task is not completed, I'm going to handle events when it changes. So we're talking about when does the task change. I'm going to monitor every time it changes. This is the green ones mean an event happened, change. And then finally, when the task is complete, I'm going to complete the task. So I'm trying to think how to do this really quick without YouTube. You know what? This is going to take too long. Let me do something a little simpler. All I'm going to do here is I'm going to log something to the activity list. What would be a demo without Hello World? Hello World, and then the workflow is going to be finished. I mean, so this is obviously not anything too exciting. And I'm going to go ahead and just simply click F5. So what's happening right now? One second. Before I talk, I'm going to show words. I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I want to move past data to a website, would that require Visual Studio, or could I do that through Design?
You could either have someone develop a custom, so yes, in one way or another it would require Visual Studio. Because you either have to have the call web service action to put into Designer, if you want to reuse that often, if you're going to have a bunch of people running Designer workflows, and that would be something they would commonly, then yes, you would probably want to write that as a reusable activity. Otherwise, you would just write it in Visual Studio. So one way or another, yes, you're either developing the workflow or the action. Or going out to the web and finding, you know, some things on GoFlex, or you've got Nintex, right? Like that's something that Nintex offers. So what happened here is, even though all I did was hit F5, it compiled my code, it packaged it up into a SharePoint feature and solution, it deployed that solution out to SharePoint via some SharePoint commands, deploy solution, add solution, deploy solution, things we've done all manually before. And then it actually does the association to this library. So if I go over to the library settings and look at workflow, you'll actually see that my workflow has already been associated. So that's something I would have had to do into the UI. Visual Studio did all that for me. So I can go ahead and go over here, documents already out here, and say workflows. I want to start my awesome workflow. And you can see it's completed because it only did one. And it wrote Hello World to the history list. So you can see it didn't take me too long to get something working, up and running. In 2007, that would have been a lot longer, unless I was using some other tools that I would have had to also manually set up and known how to use. Now it's just create a new project and go. I highly advocate, if you are a SharePoint developer, that you understand all this stuff that's going on, just like anything else. If you're doing ASP.NET, you want to understand the fundamentals of web development. Otherwise, you don't have a safety net. You want to understand what's going on, but as a productivity enhancer, this is fantastic. The Visual Studio is great. So we have 5 minutes left. I figured we'd have time for questions.
How do you see .NET 4 impacting a future version of SharePoint Designer regarding workflows?
SharePoint Designer specifically?
Yeah, well, the workflows. You
Sure.
said earlier that .NET 4 had different workflows. How do you see that impacting a future version of?
Well, unfortunately, as usual, Microsoft, they're pretty tight-lipped about what's next. So all I can do is, guesses.
Okay,
I think it's probably a pretty strong bet that the next version of workflow in SharePoint will be built on the 4.0.
right.
That would be silly not to. I would be really angry. But I would assume that that's a good bet. As to what that means, obviously, especially because of the adoption of that we even saw in 2007 and the continued adoption that we're going to be seeing in 2010, there's going to be a lot of people that have a lot of collateral, a lot of IP built up around this model of workflow. So they're not going to just leave people hanging, I hope. If anyone's listening from Microsoft, don't do that. So I'm going to assume that that they're going to provide some kind of backwards compatibility. Workflow 4 already has even